is kind of weird for me because usually, I'm usually awake at this time, but I'm off work tonight. So, welcome to Beers with Ben once again. Tonight, got a local favorite, Red Oak. They're like Bavarian style lager. It's fabulous. Uh, I'm not drunk, trust me. But I just opened this one, and it's the only one I'm having tonight. So, but I have a cigar as well, actually given to me by my aunt. I've been saving it for a while. So, off work tonight. Figure I'd do one of these since I've got nothing else to do but go to bed, really. Um, and then talk about number 23, which is called Anima, the First Adam. So for this song, there's not much to say of it musically other than I wanted to challenge myself with writing a song that isn't super heavy, but at the same time I want it to have this emotional weight to it, if that makes sense. This section after the middle metal section kind of riff has some of my favorite riffs because I was using this like really distorted but just a lot of different effects going on at the same time to give it this like distorted but ambient feel to it. And I was, playing some higher registries on my guitar, and I love the sound of it because it's heavy in a sense, but maybe in a more emo sort of way, and that was kind of what I was going for with this song, to really kind of tie in with the tone of the lyrical themes. So going into that, the song is the hero collapsing into his solitude inside the prison. And in doing so, he has flashbacks to his distant past growing up as a child and into adulthood. And it's basically him recognizing that all this stuff was what brought him to this moment in the prison. And that's kind of all I can say. Well, obviously not, but the rest of it is very specific and autobiographical for me. And so the actual meaning of what's going on in this story in many ways is the same as to real life. And so the title, the first part of the title, being the word anima, references the feminine part of a man's personality. And this is a word that's part of Carl Jung's psychoanalytic theories, which also gets into stuff with Joseph Campbell and monomyth and that sort of thing. So part of it is the main character letting out his more emotional side, dealing with his upbringing and being in this prison. But it goes further than that, as well. The next song deals with it more, which we'll talk about that, like tomorrow. But then the second part of the title refers to the first Adam, the reference to, the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve sort of thing. But calling him the first Adam by default in New Testament theology also references the antithesis of the first Adam, which would be the second Adam, Jesus Christ. So the thing is, the lyrics are about two different things. That there is a more hidden subject within it. The surface is that it's about the church, or rather institutional religion. But this, in many ways, for me at least, is very much two sides of the same coin. Um, with this, topical meaning also being involved with the hidden meaning. So think of it as like one is a microcosm and the other a macrocosm, which the stuff with church I'll eventually get to. But the hidden meaning of this song, many of my closest friends will recognize what I'm talking about, but those more on the outskirts of my life really aren't going to get it at all. I've talked about this stuff publicly in the past, but I don't really have a reason to now, to go into very specific details, because this subject doesn't just involve me, at least for this particular song. So yeah, there's not going to be ultra specific details, other than me just kind of saying that the hidden meaning deals with the subject of mental health, or rather mental illness. Um, Even when I think of my initial conversion to Christianity, others' issues with mental health were a big part of it, a catalyst, if you will. The presence of mental illness around me caused to react in certain ways, whether, in rebellion or for understanding. So, for example, a number of years ago, my best friend and I were, just hanging out one night talking about the subject. And from his perspective, he kind of pointed out to me that he realized, like, other people we knew in dealing with this subject reacted, more out of rebellion as a means to cope with it. But he saw me, that I kind of internalized it more, and it was for the purpose of trying to better understand it, and in doing so, thus fix the problem. And realizing that now, I also see that in many ways, it's also parallel with my motivations, especially in the past, of dealing with church problems. Things I've said publicly or written about in the past. Things, that I fought for or against. So there is a context behind it. And a lot of it, well, it really starts with my mentor. So we had known each other, and I've said this before, we knew each other for, around 2 years before we actually started becoming friends. The entire time we were playing church music together pretty much every week. And despite that, we only really talked a handful of times. We kind of stayed away from each other for the most part. When it went out. So then one day, she came up to me, like right before we were supposed to start playing, our set for the Sunday service, and she told me that she had had a dream about me, I guess, a couple of days before, sometime that week. And she told me about it. Told me about the dream she had and like how vivid it was to her. And all I'm going to say about the dream was that it dealt with these mental health aspects and my having to deal with it specifically. But the thing is, she really never knew before that anything about me, my past, my upbringing. Just she didn't know anything other than like I was a Christian and I went to a Christian college kind of thing. Um, and by that point, I hadn't had to deal with that subject for a number of years. So it wasn't on my mind or anything like that. Like, I had no reason to worry about those kind of issues. So I told her that the dream was interesting because of that simple fact that there was no way she could know. And with the description of it in the dream, there was no denying that this was from someone else, aka God. I started discussing some of the details with her, and in the process, discovered that she and I had a lot in common in dealing with those things. Is she had to deal with it very immediately within her family, like in the past, and I had written about specific details a couple of years before that. So, I asked if she would be interested in reading some of my work. And I emailed it to her. And, she had heard in the past that I'd done a lot of writing. And she herself had studied English or something in college. Like, I think she had her master's in English, if I remember correctly. Um, but anyway, she was really impressed by my work and wanted to read more. And the initial work dealing with mental health issues, she, in the process, asked me for my permission to send it to a friend of hers who thought, she would enjoy it because this other person was an avid reader and, with a similar English background and thought that she could use it in her career field. And I agreed, and she sent it away, and it happened to be to the woman that I wanted to marry. And um, you know she had received this work of mine like a couple of months before we ever met. It was just one of those really weird kind of serendipitous kind of subjects. And you know I met the woman I wanted to marry, a couple of months after this fact, completely unrelated circumstances through other people, and it was just completely by chance. But like, my point is that this issue of like mental health was like a catalyst for all this stuff, even though like it never really came up during that time. And so that's my only point, is to show like the interrelatedness of this. Because 2 years, fast forward to the time when my mentor actually passed away. So a couple of weeks before she passed, I got a phone call one day. And to make the long story short, it came to my attention over this conversation that mental health stuff was resurfacing after many years. And I started freaking out. This thing really is kind of ticking me off right this second. So yeah, it freaked me out. But in the moment, I was around a bunch of friends. There was a bunch around, just, having lunch with a bunch of friends, like, after church one Sunday, and I started freaking out, and nobody understood it because none of them had, dealt with that subject, because they hadn't had to, they hadn't been around when it was an issue in the past. And so, I don't want to be like, oh, they completely underplayed it, but I guess they sort of did, because they didn't understand, what was at stake. And I tried to, reason to them like, hey, this is a big deal for me because it brings out the worst in pretty much everyone. Like, y'all are going to see sides of me if I have to deal with this that y'all have never seen before. And it's not going to be good, because like, it's a different kind of survival mode. And yeah, that came to my attention a couple of weeks before she passed away. And then she passed away, we had the funeral and all that. Even at the funeral, I was aware of the mental health stuff, and actually had a couple of buddies of mine there, like trying to keep an eye out, because like I couldn't deal with that stuff like in that moment if anything arose. And I just told a couple of buddies like, hey, this is what's going on, see if anything happens, take care of it for me. I had a friend. Let me kind of break it down this way. I had a friend who was a social worker. I think she still is, but anyway, I one time overheard her talk about that with her job in social work, they have to see people as being environments themselves. That just by someone being in a place, that environment can become toxic just by somebody's kind of like presence being there. And that's sort of what happened, because everyone else in the environment just brings out the worst, because hey, people go into crisis mode, fight or flight, if you want to call it that. But it just kind of becomes this warlike sort of thing. And I was already in that mode because of my mentor's passing, and because, the woman I wanted to marry was gone. And simply put, I couldn't handle it. Maybe for the first time in my entire life. And the thing is, the situation lasted for months, and it was very bad timing, and a very bad time for me personally. But all this hitting meaning stuff is masked by it being also about church stuff. Like I said, the microcosm and the macrocosm. And like I also said, my own conversion was related to these things. So when I wrote this song, I wanted it to be like a flashback kind of scene from the character, but him interpreting these things in the present while in the prison. Because in many ways, I think that's what I ended up doing during that time. Looking at myself and my past in that present moment of dealing with death and lost love and mental health and just everything that was weighing on me. When I was very young, I was raised in a neighborhood Methodist church. So like the first number of lines really focus on that aspect of things. If I was to sum up those lines, it was just a neighborhood social institution. And sure, there was Sunday school and vacation Bible schools and whatnot, but the thing is, I never understood why Jesus died until much later when I was in middle school. And that was when my first initial, when my initial conversion happened. Because my family we started attending a Baptist church in the area, you know, like 5 minutes from my house or whatever. Um, and I think that place became a very toxic environment for us by the end of our tenure, which lasted like a year or so. So much of this song actually deals with that time period in my life because it was, you know, this like independent Baptist church that still, like, I pass by the church pretty much every day since it's, you know, like 5 minutes from my house. Um, it's, you know, a fairly fundamentalistic environment. So there was a line that said, as an earthly king demanded haircuts and disavowed maternal figures and skirts behind his pulpit. You know, it was like 2 lines from the song. So like back when I was in 7th grade or so, my hair wasn't as long as it is now, but you know, it was still fairly long. But the pastor came up to my parents one night um, after like a church service, like Sunday night church service, and the youth pastor at the time decided to take all us kids out, you know, for ice cream at Carvel or some place like that. And you know, that back then that was actually something I didn't get to do a whole lot, you know, very often. Like it was like an actual treat to go out and grab something simple as ice cream, you know. But the pastor, this thing's not staying lit good, but it's it's a pretty good cigar. It's somewhere kind of in the middle, mild, but not too mild. Um, anyway, back to the story. The pastor came up to my parents while like we were leaving to go get ice cream, sort of thing, and you know, I sang in the choir at that time, and pastor told them that if I was going to continue um, singing in the choir, then I had to get a haircut, which I very reluctantly did. When I say reluctantly, it was like to the degree that I sat in the parking lot for like 30 minutes or however long with my dad. You know, my dad trying to convince me like it isn't a big deal, like just go on and, you know, kind of suck it up sort of thing. Um, you know, and saying, look, you're either gonna continue singing, you know, or you can keep your hair. And you know, my initial reaction was, well, I'll just keep my hair. And he eventually convinced me, you know, to go on and get my hair cut, which, you know, I think he brought it up or something in conversation and maybe a year or two ago and said, you know, he regretted that. You know, I never blamed him for any of that. Like, it is what it is. Obviously, he let me grow my hair out in the first place, so my dad didn't have a problem with it. It was the asshole pastor, you know. I mean, just call it for what it is. The dude, it's kind of funny too because like the pastor is basically one of my neighbors now. Like I never see the dude. I haven't seen him in years, and you know, I think I ran into him at like a baseball game in high school a number of years ago. Um, like right before I was supposed to go off to ORU, and like talked to him shortly. I've been inside that church a couple of times in, you know, the last like 15 years or so. So I'm not like screw this guy or whatever. I mean, might be an asshole for that, but you know, whatever. Like, doesn't really have any power over me anymore. But you know, I also have to recognize that it kind of, well, it definitely set kind of a precedence, religiously speaking, of, screw that sort of stuff. Like, I'm not gonna play by those rules ever again, you know, because I, sure ended up leaving that church, but went off to ORU where it was the same kind of thing. And, ended up in a job where it's the same kind of thing. Like, you have to keep your hair short. I'm not supposed to have this now, but I'm just like literally of the attitude, fire me. Like, I don't care. Like, obviously I don't want to lose my job, but like, I'm not willing to just bend over anymore. It's not worth it. You know, for freedom, you're set free kind of thing. That's not freedom to me, to impose those kind of just, anyway. But yeah, that's what that line is about. And then similarly, my mom, she sang a song or whatever once in the church, and not long after that, see, I told you this thing was kind of annoying me. Yeah, my mom sang a song. She was wearing a skirt or something that night, and the pastor made some comment about it afterwards, that no woman would ever stand behind his pulpit ever again, wearing a skimpy skirt or whatever, and basically, I guess, tried to publicly shame my mom. But the thing was, my mom was wearing a skirt that was given to her by my great aunt, who just so happened to be a pastor's wife herself. So, it may have come like right above the knee or whatever, but it wasn't like some tight skirt or whatever like some girls would wear to a club. This was just a skirt, that sort of thing. It just kind of puts gasoline to my fire, if you will. And then the rest of the song deals with aspects of, the idea of holy war, and how it was like they were training us to become this fundamentalist soldier to fight a culture holy war. And the song mentions original sin as well. And the reason why I put original sin in there is not just because it's some theological term that people use, but it's because I knew the idea of original sin before I learned the theological term when I was, 18 or 19. Like, I guess I was probably in college when I first, learned that. And I was like, oh yeah, I was having an existential crisis at 13 years old because of that idea, not even knowing what it was. And it was because of that church. Now, like, when I say original sin, like, for me, it literally came to, like, my very birth and consummation and stuff like that was perhaps a sin, because, like, not throwing shade here or anything like that, but, I discovered at that time that my dad had been shortly married for like a month and a half or something like that when he was 18, before my mom. And, the fact that he remarried was like a sin or something to these people. And so, like, overhearing all this stuff, it made me wonder, well, is my very existence, being born on this planet, like something that's irredeemable? Because I'm the product of this sin just simply because my dad decided to remarry. You know, like how crazy is that? But it isn't crazy because there's so many churches out there that believe stuff like that and don't believe in like redemption at all, really. I mean, oh, you can believe in redemption for your eternal soul, but you can't believe in sexual or marital redemption or anything like that. Like, that's complete bullshit in my book, and I don't care who gets offended by that. Like, I can say that because, like, I was dealing with that kind of shit when I was 13 years old. Like, no 13-year-old should have to be asking those kind of questions. But, you know, because of that fundamentalistic environment, like, yeah, I had to. And it shaped me, like, whether I like, whether I want to admit it or not, like, it did. And it doesn't mean that, like, it has to have power over me, but like I said, it's gasoline to that fire. Um, that I have to rebel against that kind of stuff because it's toxic. Um, and moving on, you know, with war, you know, culture war and church kind of stuff, I mentioned, you know, my favorite Saint Cyprian quote, you know, look that up. And there's also reference to, you know, Ahola and Aholaba, you know, I worded in there in, you know, the Ben Bowman version that says, lust for lovers with donkey dicks and come like horses. Yeah. If you don't like that, then don't read Ezekiel 23 because that's pretty much what that reference is, just so you know. And I use the lines, was I of Gomer, not of God's people, and he not my God, unpitied and punished. And that references the book of Hosea, of course, but actually, like, unpitied and punished is pretty much the name of, like, one of the kids that Hosea, you know, is told to name, you know. Basically, their name means just that. So anyway, the lines at the end of the song deal with the religious ideas, but also they also deal with mental illness because, like, in this song, it's kind of one and the same. And so the end deals with the realization of desiring a cure for all these bad things, but it leads the character to becoming a freedom fighter storming a distant shore, which is reference to the beginning, like the very, very beginning of volume 1, you know, chapter 1 and chapter 2 is that. So this song, even though it's in the present moment in the prison, is serving as a prequel of sorts. And lastly, I want to mention the specific artwork that I did for this song, because I haven't really talked a whole lot about the artwork. But that's because mostly I think the artwork should really kind of speak for itself. It just kind of goes in tandem with the actual music and the theme and motifs and whatnot. So when I was in college, like my last semester, I think I took in a semester of black and white photography, which I love black and white photography. I wish I had a studio space now that I could do more with it because it was just a blast. Like going in and developing black and white photos, like I could do stuff like that all day and just it's fun. Um, and when I created the artwork, I knew I wanted to use black and white photos, but really from like that semester in college, that's really the only, pictures I had. Um, so, I went through stack or whatever that I still have and chose the most interesting pictures. Like, since some of it deals with like ORU environment, some of it made sense to, put in this song or whatever. But like some of it was just like, to me, the photos themselves are pictorially interesting, but they didn't really fit in with, the actual, you know, theme for this song per se. But one of the pictures that I took was like a group of us, a bunch of friends of mine. We like loaded up in some cars and like pickup truck kind of thing, and went to a drive-in theater, watched a couple of movies or whatever, hung out, and I took this picture while we were there. Bunch of my friends were just kind of like dancing around and just acting goofy or whatever. And it's a cool picture. But I think there was like a line in the song that kind of referenced, um, you know, we're of the second Adam sort of thing, but how are we like any different from the first? And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, this this picture, even though it isn't like bad at all, like it could appear that way in this right context. So it's, just making the photo, fit into the song. But put all these, imposed all these pictures on to the paper, basically glued it down, and then did a bunch of oil painting over top of it. And anyway, one of the people who was in this photo, ironically, I haven't heard from them in years or anything like that, but they messaged me out of the blue, maybe like a month or so ago, and like strangely enough, they were, I guess, looking for advice or something, because they were dealing with the same kind of stuff with mental illness in a, extremely similar way in their life. And they were like, I think I remember you talking about this stuff in the past. I was wondering if it was you and all. And, offered my advice and whatnot. But in the process, I was like, well, I haven't read this stuff in years, or, really thought about it. And so while I was dealing with all that stuff with this friend of mine, I reread the exact same thing that I had sent my mentor back when we first became friends, and also the woman who I wanted to marry. And I mean, a lot of it was material I haven't thought about in years and years and years. And like, it was hard. I don't want to relive that stuff all the time. It's not good to. But for this one morning, rereading this stuff, there's a lot of things that I had almost forgotten about. I was like, oh yeah, that happened, and this happened, and oh crap, that, and just how intense it was. And kind of helps give me new perspective for this song, I suppose, of just realizing that all this stuff from like growing up really kind of sets precedence for a lot of things, and just shapes me overall. I mean, like I keep saying it, it's gasoline for the fire, I suppose, because when you're put in these kind of situations, moments of crisis and whatnot, trauma, if you want to, I mean, yeah, trauma, really. Um, I mean, how you react in those times means so much, because it becomes precedence. It shapes you in these ways that a lot of times you just don't realize until those moments when you're in your own like emotional, spiritual, whatever prison, and you have all this time to just kind of reflect on all these things that brought you to these moments or whatever. And so yeah, this song's about that, because literally right after my mentor passed away, I was having to deal with this trauma and crisis that was completely unrelated, but just was stacked on top of the stress that I was already dealing with, and the sorrow and yada yada yada. It was a terrible time. And so that's why I wrote this song, and why I wrote it in a way that it doesn't sound angry and stuff like that, because it was really just a song about trying to understand these things and recognizing, being wounded and wanting to fix it, but being completely unable to. And so with that, that's this song, and it leads directly into the next song, but just in a completely different way, with two sides of the same thing sort of thing. But with that, cheers.